My name is Danielle, and I was 33 years old when my own family decided I no longer mattered. It happened in my parents' house, the same one where my height was once marked in pencil on the kitchen doorway, where Sunday mornings smelled like burnt toast and cheap coffee, where every version of me had once belonged. That night, the walls felt closer than I remembered. The ceiling fan hummed overhead, slow and uneven, as if it were straining under the weight of the silence that had settled over the dining table. We were sitting where we always sat, same seats, same chipped plates, same conversations that usually circled harmless topics, work, the kids, grocery prices. But something had been off from the moment I walked in. The air carried a tightness like a held breath that no one wanted to release. Melissa was the first to break it. She leaned back in her chair, arms folded with the confidence of someone who believed she spoke for the room. Her tone wasn't raised. That made it worse. Calm words cut deeper. "Let's just say it," she said. "Danielle doesn't add anything to this family anymore." For a split second, I genuinely thought I'd misheard her. The sentence didn't feel real. It floated between us, unfinished, waiting for someone, anyone, to challenge it. No one did. The clink of a fork against a plate echoed far too loudly. My mother's eyes dropped instantly, fixed on a stain in the tablecloth like it had suddenly become fascinating. My father exhaled through his nose, a long, wary breath that sounded practiced, as though this conversation had already happened without me. My brother Ethan shifted in his seat, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I searched their faces, one by one, desperate for a signal. A raised eyebrow, a shake of the head, a simple "that's not true." Nothing came. Melissa took the silence as permission. "She doesn't have kids," she continued, ticking off points with invisible checkmarks. "She's not married. She's barely around. She shows up late, leaves early. What exactly are we supposed to be grateful for?" Grateful. The word struck me harder than the accusation. Gratitude implied debt. It suggested that love here had conditions. That worth was something you earned through milestones, not presents. My face burned, not the quick heat of embarrassment, but the slow, creeping warmth of humiliation. Anger surged first, sharp and instinctive, but it tangled immediately with something heavier. Sadness. Because deep down, I recognized the rhythm of her words. These weren't thoughts formed in the moment. They were rehearsed, polished by repetition. I opened my mouth, my body moving on instinct, ready to defend myself, to explain, to list reasons why I mattered. Melissa lifted her hand without even looking at me. "I'm not trying to be cruel," she said, her voice coated in false restraint. "I'm just being honest. We all agree, right?" The silence that followed was worse than her words. A small nod from my father, barely perceptible but there. A murmur from Ethan that might have been agreement or might have been cowardice. I'll never know. My mother stayed quiet, which somehow felt like confirmation. Agreement. It settled over me like a verdict. I felt myself shrinking in that chair, my spine pressing into the wood, my feet suddenly too far from the ground. I became acutely aware of everything, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint crack in the ceiling, the smell of detergent on my mother's sweater. All the things that had once felt like home now felt like evidence in a case against me. I thought of every time I'd driven over late at night just to make sure they were okay. Every birthday card I'd remembered. Every quiet sacrifice no one had noticed because I never announced it. None of it mattered. In their eyes, my life didn't fit the template anymore. I hadn't failed loudly. I'd failed quietly, and that, apparently, was worse. In that moment, something inside me broke cleanly, like a bone snapping without warning. I realized I wasn't just being criticized. I was being erased. Reduced to what they could see on the surface and dismissed for what they'd never bothered to look for. I wasn't angry yet. I was hollow. And sitting there, surrounded by the people who were supposed to know me best, I understood a devastating truth. They had already decided who I was, and whatever I said next would not change it. They thought I was invisible because I trained myself to be quiet. I learned early that silence kept the peace. That if I didn't demand space, I wouldn't be accused of taking too much of it. When I moved out years ago, I didn't announce it like a victory. I packed my things on a Sunday afternoon, hugged my parents, and drove away without drama. Independence, to me, wasn't something you celebrated, it was something you managed responsibly. My job in financial compliance suited that instinct perfectly. It was demanding in the most unglamorous way possible. Long hours spent reviewing risk reports, reconciling numbers that had to be exact down to the cent, answering emails that never stopped multiplying. There were no flashy titles, no impressive anecdotes to share over dinner. When people asked what I did, their eyes glazed over halfway through my explanation. I learned to shorten it. I work with numbers, I'd say, and leave it at that. Melissa's life, by contrast, was visible, loud, measurable. She married young, had 2 kids before 30, and made sure everyone knew how tired she was. Her exhaustion became proof of her value. If she complained, it was because she was doing something important. If she struggled, it meant she was sacrificing. She wore her stress openly, like a uniform, and the family rewarded her for it with sympathy and praise. To Melissa, contribution only counted if it could be seen. She didn't see me hunched over my laptop at midnight, calculator open, bank statements spread across my desk like a second language I never got to forget. She didn't see the consulting work I picked up on weekends, the contracts I accepted because they paid just enough to make the difference. She didn't see me saying no to vacations, postponing purchases, choosing practicality over comfort without ever mentioning it to anyone. She didn't see the math. When Dad's hours were cut at work, it didn't happen all at once. It came in slow reductions, fewer shifts, smaller checks. At first, they brushed it off. Then the bills started arriving later than usual. Then the envelopes changed color. Red. They stacked them on the counter like something shameful. I noticed them one evening when I stopped by to drop off groceries. I didn't say anything. I watched my mother's hands tremble as she moved them out of sight. The call came a week later. It was late, and Mom's voice was tight, compressed, like she was forcing each word through a narrow opening. She whispered so Dad wouldn't hear, even though they were in the same house. "We're behind," she said. "On the mortgage. We don't know what to do." I remember standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wall like it might offer instructions. My heart didn't race. I didn't panic. Something colder and clearer settled over me instead. "I'll help," I told her. And I meant it, just not in the way she assumed. I didn't send partial payments. I didn't wait to be asked again. I didn't make it temporary. I took over. I set up automatic transfers, aligned them with my pay schedule, adjusted my budget until it fit around the obligation. Every month, the full amount went out. Sometimes, when things felt uncertain, I paid 2 months ahead. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I needed the house to be safe. Quietly, reliably, without ceremony. I never told Melissa. I never told Ethan. I didn't even tell my parents the full truth. I let them believe things were just working out. That Dad's hours would bounce back. That the worst had passed. Because this was my family, and family, I believed, didn't keep score. But sitting at that table, listening to Melissa reduce my entire existence to what she could see, something inside me fractured, not all at once. Slowly, like stress on a fault line that had been ignored for too long. They called me average. Useless. Nothing. And for the first time, I wondered what my silence had actually protected. Not them. Just their version of the story. The argument didn't start with shouting. It started with a simmering tension, a slow rise of heat that seemed to coat the air in a sticky, suffocating layer. Melissa's words had been measured, deliberate, like a scalpel tracing a line she intended to cut along. But now, after the cumulative jabs, the years of dismissals, the quiet erasure of my presence, the tension snapped. Melissa stood, letting the chair scrape harshly against the hardwood floor. Her hands clenched at her sides as she began to pace. Each step was precise, deliberate, calculated to dominate the space. Honestly, Danielle, she said, her voice sharper now, trembling just enough to betray a vulnerability she refused to acknowledge. You always act like you're above us. But when it comes down to it, you don't show up. You don't contribute. Contribution. That word landed in the room like a hammer. I laughed. Short, dry, hollow, like air being forced through a broken pipe. You want to talk about contribution? I said, letting the words roll over the table, tasting each one before it left my mouth. There was no malice, not yet. Just the weight of every overlooked effort I had made. Every silent sacrifice compressed into that question. Melissa's lip curled in an automatic sneer. Please, tell me what you've done. Enlighten us. My father's chair creaked as he leaned back, weary exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Let's not do this, he said, voice low, an attempt at calm that barely held the storm at bay. But it was too late. Something had ignited inside me. A fierce, burning clarity forged over years of restraint, of swallowed pride, of small, unseen acts of responsibility that nobody credited. I straightened in my chair, hands gripping the edges, heart beating steadily, mind precise. I think we should do this, I said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of inevitability, a knife cutting through the pretense. All eyes turned to me. The air thickened with anticipation, disbelief, a sense that the ground beneath us had shifted. I reached into my bag, my hands trembling slightly, betraying only the anticipation of revealing the truth. The folder I pulled out was thick, heavy, filled with proof, receipts, statements, highlighted lines that mapped years of unacknowledged labor. I never wanted to embarrass anyone, I said, carefully, deliberately, letting the sentence linger. But since we're being honest, I slid the folder across the table. It thudded softly, but in that room, it might as well have exploded. Melissa leaned forward, frowning, her fingers trembling as they lifted the first sheet. What is this? She asked, her voice unsteady now, the pretense of confidence cracking. The mortgage, I said, words measured, calm, unwavering. Every payment, for the last 4 years. The color drained from her face. Her jaw tightened and the pages slipped from her fingers as if they burned. That's not, she began, then stopped, eyes widening as she absorbed the amounts, the dates, the unbroken string of my name on every line. My mother gasped, hands covering her mouth. Danielle, you've been paying this. All of it, I said. Every single month, when Dad couldn't, when things got tight. I made sure this house stayed standing. The room shifted, unsteady, like a ship caught in an unseen current. Silence spread, not the dismissive kind that accompanies disinterest, but the stunned, brittle kind that presses down on the chest and makes breathing deliberate. My father's eyes glistened, moisture threatening to spill as he whispered, "Why didn't you tell us?" I swallowed. The motion was deliberate, a physical anchor, because I didn't do it for praise. Melissa's voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. That can't be right. I met her eyes, steady, unwavering, the clarity of years of quiet labor condensed into one sentence. Check the bank, ask the lender. This house exists because I refuse to let it be taken from you. And then there was silence, loaded, tense, raw. Not emptiness, not denial, but the kind of stunned quiet that hits like a blow, leaving space for reflection, fear, and the irrevocable acknowledgement that everything had changed. The air in the dining room had changed. It didn't happen all at once. It was subtle, like a tide shifting beneath the surface, but unmistakable once you noticed it. The weight of years of assumptions and unspoken resentments pressed down on us, and for the first time, it was no longer one-sided. The truth I had forced into the open had landed with a gravity that left no room for pretense. Ethan sat frozen, eyes scanning the pages as though they were crime scene evidence. Each number, each date, each meticulous entry, my name written in ink next to every payment, pressed into him the reality of what had been quietly sustaining our family. He swallowed, a slow, conscious motion, his hands gripping the edge of the table like it could anchor him against the tidal wave of realization. My mother, unable to contain herself, covered her mouth with trembling hands. Tears slipped through her fingers, tracing lines down her cheeks. The years of worry, the nights spent sleepless over bills, the subtle tension in the house that she had tried to shield us from, it all spilled at once. Her shoulders shook with the weight of emotion, and for a moment, I saw not the woman who had scolded me for being absent, but the woman who had been silently drowning alongside the rest of us, too proud to ask for help. Melissa, who had stood moments ago, radiating judgment and certainty, now sank slowly back into her chair. Her hands lay limply in her lap. She seemed smaller somehow, diminished not physically, but in the carefully constructed narrative she had carried about herself. Her eyes, once sharp with accusation, now flicked across the pages as though they might dissolve the truth if she looked hard enough. "I didn't know," she said finally, voice small, tentative, almost fearful. "I know," I replied, steady, calm. "That's the problem." She opened her mouth again, as if to argue, to defend herself, to reclaim her identity as the responsible one, the provider, the backbone of our family. But no words came. The truth had stripped the armor she had worn for years. Her identity, carefully built on visible effort and recognition, crumbled silently in that chair. I watched her struggle with a reality she hadn't prepared for. That someone she thought she depended on, someone she believed was invisible, had quietly held the foundation together. I wasn't angry anymore. The fire I had carried, the fury that had fueled my demonstration of proof, had burned itself down to embers. I was exhausted, bone-tired from years of holding space for a family that hadn't acknowledged my presence, my choices, my sacrifices. "I didn't want this," I said quietly, my voice almost a whisper, yet sharp enough to cut through the lingering silence. "I wanted respect, or at least not to be erased." My father rose slowly from his chair. His movements were deliberate, heavy with years of regret. He crossed the distance between us and pulled me into a hug. His arms were warm, yet trembling, carrying the weight of unspoken apologies and missed opportunities. "I failed you," he admitted, his voice breaking in a way that left no doubt about the sincerity of his words. "No," I said, pressing back, trying to steady both of us. "We all failed to talk." Melissa finally lifted her gaze to mine, really looked at me, beyond the accusations, beyond her insecurities. "I judged you because I was insecure," she confessed. Her voice was raw, fragile, and for the first time, unguarded. "You didn't need us, and I needed to feel important. It wasn't an excuse. I didn't need it to be. But it was the truth, and sometimes the truth alone is enough to crack open a family and let light in." The room was quiet now, but it wasn't the oppressive silence of before. It was a silence of reckoning, of acknowledgement, of understanding settling into the spaces that had once been filled with judgment and dismissal. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Fully, not for what I wasn't, not for what they assumed, but for what I had done, and for who I had been all along. I didn't move back into that house. Not immediately. Not ever with the same mindset that had carried me there as a 33-year-old woman, hoping for acknowledgement that never came. I realized in that quiet aftermath of revelation that my value wasn't tied to the walls, the floors, or even the bloodlines stitched across the dining table. My worth wasn't something anyone could measure by visibility or applause. It was intrinsic, quietly, unwaveringly mine. I didn't demand repayment, either, not in bills or in lists or in loud confessions shouted from rooftops. The idea of ledger justice never occurred to me. This wasn't about vindication. It was about something simpler, something that had eluded me for years amid the undercurrent of family expectations and measured contributions. I demanded honesty, boundaries, respect. The bare minimum, really, and yet it had been absent for so long it had felt revolutionary to claim. The family gatherings changed after that night, though not dramatically at first. People hesitated, as if tiptoeing through a minefield of guilt, surprise, and lingering disbelief. I spoke when I wanted to speak. no longer shrinking my words to make room for others' egos or insecurities. My voice, once easily drowned in the chorus of judgment, now carried weight simply because I refused to let it be silenced. Conversations no longer edged around me, and for the first time in years, my presence wasn't questioned. It existed. Plain and unadorned. Solid. Melissa changed too. She's quieter now, more deliberate in her words. Sometimes the old tension flares, her pride still catches her, sharp as an edge, but she pauses before speaking. Sometimes she thanks me outright, sometimes with a fleeting glance, sometimes through subtle acts of acknowledgement I never request, but always notice. Other times, she struggles silently, wrestling with her own insecurities and the realization that she had been measuring herself against the wrong standard for years. That's her journey to navigate, and I've stopped trying to dictate its pace. I, on the other hand, discovered something fundamental. My strength doesn't require visibility. My contribution doesn't need to be loud or performative to matter. I learned that power isn't a volume, it's a consistency. It's a quiet insistence on integrity, a steadfastness in the face of dismissal, a refusal to let others define your value. I realize that the sacrifices I make, the ones no one asks about, the ones no one sees, are no less meaningful than the ones celebrated openly. There is a subtle triumph in that knowledge. Not the kind that fuels pride or vengeance, but the kind that allows peace. I can sit at the table, participate fully, and know that my worth isn't conditional on approval, acknowledgement, or the fragile flares of someone else's ego. I've stopped shrinking. I've stopped apologizing for existing. I've stopped offering proof unless someone explicitly attempts to erase me. They said I added nothing to this family, that I was average, invisible, irrelevant. And yet, when I look back at the quiet persistence of my efforts, at the years of responsibility carried without recognition, I understand the truth. I was never invisible. I was the foundation. I was the quiet force that kept the house upright when others assumed it would stand on its own. I held it together, not for accolades, not for gratitude, not for validation, but because it mattered, because they mattered. Now I know my worth. It isn't negotiable, it isn't conditional, and it isn't something anyone else can erase. I was never nothing. I was holding the whole damn house up. And finally, everyone can see it, not in applause, not in shame, but in the quiet acknowledgement that some things, no matter how invisible they seem, sustain everything else.